All right, we're just going to go ahead and do a second video so I can thoroughly explain checks and balances to you and also the amendment process. Okay, so checks and balances, like I said in the last video, forces each branch to consider what the other branches want. So this is enhanced, checks and balances is enhanced in a time of divided government. So you have two different political parties. Republicans, they have their idea of how the government can best represent the people, and they have their idea of how the government can provide services and protect the public good of the United States and respond to the demands of the people. Democrats have an often opposing view of what's best for the people and what services the people should be provided by the government. So if our Republican Congress passes a law that is contradictory to the philosophy of our Democratic president will perhaps veto that. So checks and balances is enhanced in a situation where you have divided government. All right, so let's go through the different checks. Let's start with the executive branch, even though your chart starts with the legislative branch. Okay, so the executive, what can he do to the legislative branch? He can propose laws, so even though Congress writes them, he can come up with the ideas for them and put pressure on Congress to pass laws. For example, over this past year in 2016, as the Zika virus became an issue, and the spread of the Zika virus in the southeast in Florida became an issue, the president put pressure on Congress to appropriate or give money and pass law that would provide money for fighting and doing Zika research. The president can veto laws. So again, if the Republicans in Congress write a law that the president cannot tolerate, he will veto it, which means that law is dead. That law can go back to Congress for an override. I'll talk about that in a second. The president can call a special session of Congress. So if Congress has gone on break and the president feels like they haven't completed their responsibilities, he can bring them back in. Or if Congress is on vacation or on break or recess, and there is a major emergency that the president wants Congress to address, he could call them in for a special session. So that's like being on vacation and your boss calls you back into work. It's not always the best scenario. The president makes appointments to the different departments, to the courts, and to the embassies. So if the president wants to fill a Supreme Court spot, he can make that appointment. That really becomes more of a check that Congress has over him because Congress has to approve those appointments. And the president can go abroad and negotiate treaties. Like President Obama has his executive branch, John Kerry, his Secretary of State, has negotiated a treaty with Iran to monitor and prevent them from having nuclear weapons. So the nuclear weapons deal or the nuclear deal with Iran was negotiated by the president. And then it has to be approved by the Senate. So that's a check that the Senate has on him. All right, the executive branch over the judicial. The president gets to appoint federal judges, and that's from the Supreme Court all the way to the lower federal district courts. Currently, there is a vacancy on our Supreme Court because Anton Scalia died earlier this year in 2016. The president has appointed Merrick Garland, who is a left-leaning moderate with a lot of judicial experience, and he has not been approved or considered by the Senate yet. The president can also grant pardons to federal offenders. So if the federal court system finds somebody guilty of a crime, the president can lessen their sentence, commute their sentence, or clear their record. All right, so Congress over the executive branch. Congress can override a president's veto. So if the president rejects law passed by Congress, that law goes back to both houses. Both houses have to pass an override by 2/3 vote. This is nearly impossible, so about 2% of presidential vetoes actually are overridden. That's a good number to have down. It's very rare. So again, only 2% of presidential vetoes are overridden. The legislative branch confirms executive appointments. So going back to that Merrick Garland, who was appointed by President Obama to fill the Supreme Court vacancy, the Senate is responsible for confirming that appointment, and they have not considered him yet. The Senate is responsible for ratifying the treaties, like the Iranian nuclear treaty that was negotiated by the president's administration. Both houses declare war. The House of Representatives is responsible for initiating all appropriation bills, and appropriating money means handing out money, giving money to the different departments and agencies and to the states, and that's the House. And like I said before, the House can impeach the president, which is bringing about formal charges, and the Senate will remove the president. We have never removed a president. We have impeached Johnson and we have impeached Clinton, but neither of those presidents were convicted in a Senate trial, so neither one of them were removed. Legislative checks on the judicial branch. If Congress wants to add another federal court to a state, or if if Congress wants to increase the number of judges on the Supreme Court, they have the power to do so. Just like they can impeach the president and remove him, they can do the same thing to judges. So again, that's done at the House, the impeachment, and the Senate tries. They can propose amendments to overrule judicial decisions. So it's the judicial branch's job to interpret the Constitution. If Congress doesn't like the way that the Constitution is being interpreted, they can propose to change the Constitution, and if Congress can amend the Constitution, that will change the way that the courts read it, obviously, because it has been altered. And then, of course, the legislative branch, as we've talked about here and here, if you want your job on the court system or you want your job on the Supreme Court, you have to be approved by the Senate. The judicial branch doesn't have quite as much responsibility or checks over the other two branches. They were kind of the afterthought. The third branch was really the weaker branch. Checks on the executive branch that the judicial branch has is they can declare executive actions unconstitutional, and the judicial branch can declare laws or acts of Congress unconstitutional. Okay. So I mentioned proposing amendments and ratifying amendments or changes to the Constitution. That is going to be the last chart you have. Okay, so how can you or how do you amend the Constitution? Okay, it hasn't actually, the Constitution is pretty awesome. It's a living document. We haven't really messed with it very much since 1787. We have made some adjustments to it. We've modernized it a little bit. Got rid of slavery, allowed women to vote, allowed 18 to 20-year-olds to vote. We've done some pretty good things to the Constitution like that. But for the most part, the Constitution is a 200-year-old house that just needs a little bit of updating from time to time. It is a flexible document, but it is difficult to amend it. And I'm going to tell you why it's difficult to amend it. Because you have to have a lot of people to agree on amending the Constitution. So, for example, just to come up with a proposed change, this isn't even actually changing the verbiage of the document, but just coming up with the proposed amendment. You have to get a 2/3 vote from both houses of Congress to change the Constitution. Now, 2/3 is going to be difficult to do because you don't, if you're voting on party lines, like you're voting Democrats all together or Republicans all together, as Congress generally does, getting 2/3 of anybody in Congress to agree is going to be difficult. So 2/3 of the House would be, yeah, I'm doing math right now, would be over 200, it's about 260 people have to agree in Congress, and there's not 260 majority of any one of the political parties. So that's going to be difficult. Then, if you can't get that, 2/3 of both houses of Congress, you can do this. 2/3 of state legislators vote to change the Constitution. Um, that actually should be 2/3 of state legislators vote to hold a national convention to change the Constitution. So that would mean 2/3 of state legislators would ask for there to be a convention in DC to consider a proposed amendment. Kind of like what we did with the Constitutional Convention, where states sent delegates to Philly and they decided to change articles, and we wrote a constitution from that point. That's never been done, so it's kind of weird to understand how that would look in today's time. So basically, 33 states would have to say, hey, let's change the Constitution and hold a convention in DC at the national level to just propose a change. Now, once you've proposed a change, you have to get that change accepted or ratified. Now, once a constitutional amendment is proposed, it gets kicked down to the state level. So you have 3/4 of the states that have to agree to pass an amendment. So if you have 50 states, you have to get 75% of them to agree. So that would be 37 states have to be on the same page to change the Constitution. We have a very diverse country, and it's going to be very difficult to get 37 states on the same page to decide that they want to alter the Constitution. The one thing that we've used one time, or the ratification method that we've used once, and that was to overturn the 18th Amendment and pass the 21st, ending prohibition, was the 3/4 of special convention at a state level. So that means 37 of the states hold a convention of the people in their state capitals, and those people vote to ratify an amendment. So you can imagine people probably wanted to drink legally again. So they go to their state capital and they vote to pass the 21st Amendment. Okay, now this is the key to remembering how the amendment process works. The amendment process. Amendments are proposed at the national level, even if it is 2/3 of the state legislatures calling for a national convention. All amendments are proposed at the national level, and they are ratified at the state level. They are proposed with a 2/3 vote right there, and they are ratified with a 3/4 vote. So the national level can come up with a change, but it has to be accepted by the states. Less people can propose an amendment, more people have to ratify it. All right, that is it.